Hi everyone, this is the 50 States Highpointing podcast and YouTube channel. What started off as a project for a communications class has turned into something that I actually love doing. I have the privilege of providing the platform for people to talk about the extraordinary things they do in the outdoors. Highpointing is the challenge of reaching the highest elevation in each of the 50 states. Highpointers don't get paid for their hobby, no one is sponsored by an outdoor company, and people fit this challenge into their everyday lives that also include careers and family. I found through these interviews that people who attempt this challenge are incredible and genuinely enjoy talking about their experiences. If you consider yourself a Highpointer and you want to share your story on this podcast or interview, please send me an email at 50stateshighpointingpodcast@gmail.com. It has been a pleasure speaking with every Highpointer. I hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 50 States Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and our callers today are Tom and Tommy from episode 1. They are the co-editors of the Apex to Zenith magazine. That's the official Highpointers Club magazine, and they've just put out their first publication in their new position as co-editors. So, Tom and Tommy, welcome and congratulations on a great first issue of the magazine.
Thank you. We're excited to be back with you and excited to have the first one out there and looking forward to the next one and a bunch more to come.
So how do listeners get this magazine?
Sure. It's quite simply you have to be a member of the Highpointing Club, and that's who gets the magazine. So if you join the club online and pay the annual fee, you get the magazine. So you have to be a Highpointing Club member to get the magazine. So
perfect.
That's how you get it. And you get four magazines a year. It comes out quarterly. And that's all covered in the fee.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And the listeners and the viewers on YouTube can get access to the membership website if they just go to highpointers.org. It's in the show notes. And then I think it's in the outro of each podcast. So be sure to check that out. So let's get into this first issue. I am just going to show the cover right here. And
pull back on it a little bit so we can see you.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. There it is.
So the cover, some people might recognize where I'm at. This is at Mount Whitney, and I'm at this portion of protected land right before the Whitney portal, and it's called Alabama Hills. And so when you get to Alabama Hills, there's this one arch, and it's called Mobius Arch. And if you sit in this one place in Mobius Arch, you can see Mount Whitney just right above your head. And I said, "Oh, take a picture of me there." And a couple days later, we summited Mount Whitney. So just thought that would be an interesting picture to send in to the magazine because it's a very iconic peak, and all the Highpointers recognize it. So yeah, thanks for for putting that on there. And then also the podcast has a feature in the magazine too, as it is brand new, just like this is your first issue. So again, thanks for featuring that. Always love to get the word out.
Yeah. I mean, just a little bit of background around how the whole thing came about was as Tommy and I were going through and trying to figure out, what we wanted to include in the first issue. And we didn't really have a lot of time because, we sort of were in the role. We needed to get one out as quickly as we could. We had to make sure that we highlighted the convention because it was coming up. We had to get some information out about the board of directors elections, which are coming up. So there was a lot of kind of time urgent things that we had to get done. But because we had been working with you on the podcast and the podcast was so, kind of new and exciting, we decided that you were going to be our first Highpointer of the Quarter award winner. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. That was awesome to see.
And look, I think well-deserved, right? Because this podcast is getting the word out, hopefully to more and more people over time, but certainly a whole new format and a whole new approach. And that's one of our objectives, is to really begin to move the media forward in terms of our communication with Highpointers everywhere. But what happened was if you remember, I asked you to send a picture because we just intended to put a little picture of you when we were doing the Highpointer of the Quarter, and you sent 3 pictures, and that one that you just showed let's see if, I don't know if people can see it from here as well, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just jumped out at us as what an awesome shot, right? Because it captured Whitney, the setting was perfect, just the color of the sky, even like the sun up in the corner.
Yeah.
It just was really such a great picture. So, you inspired us to be the first cover. So great job.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I think something we were trying to do with this first edition, exactly like Tom said, we had not a time constraint, but we did want to get the information out to everybody, in a really prompt manner once we did take over and say we could, be the new editors. So we didn't want to waste a lot of time with original content. I don't think on this first episode, on this first magazine, we really wanted to focus on, what needs updated, what has been done before. But we were thinking about, how can we put our stamp on this a little bit, and I think. The podcast helped. We're trying to bring the community together. So are you, on a more storytelling basis, right? A little bit more personal content, for everybody from who has 1 or 2 all the way to 50. And I think people should be looking forward to some of that in the future.
Yeah, the stories are phenomenal. I mean, hopefully, as we're talking through, you can highlight a couple of them. One kind of announcement that we can make, I guess, is we are going to, in collaboration with you, highlight the podcast in each issue of Apex to Zenith. And so this next upcoming issue will have our first, Lauren Toner Highpointer podcast update. And I think if we continue to do that each time, it'll be a really exciting way to connect what you're doing in the magazine.
Yeah, it's fun. And so many listeners are High Pointers Club members, and so they get this issue. And it's fun to make that connection. And, maybe people who are high pointing didn't know that there was a club, and maybe first heard that there was a podcast and thought, oh, okay, this is a community. I can be part of it. I can go to this convention. And then, they become part of a bigger thing. And that's always a good thing. And, I'm getting a lot of emails from listeners saying, thanks for just putting out content about our weird little hobby. I had no idea other people did this, and it's so cool. So, getting the word out is really fun, and when you can be creative about it, I think that's just great. And so, this is a great issue. And, one of the things I was noticing that when I look through it is like, we're pointing out not just high pointing, but other things that high pointers do. So I noticed there was a highlight in the issue about a man who does county high points.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of that.
Yeah. It's actually a very big venture for a number of people out there. And in each issue, we're going to try to highlight that as well. I think reflecting back on the first issue a little bit, because as we said, we were in a little bit of a time crunch. But what you said about people being happy to see kind of the quirky, interesting little stories really is something that we want to do as much of as we possibly can. Because, everybody has their own little adventure that they kind of, the planning of it is fun, and then getting out there and executing, and you complete some, you don't complete some, you do a bunch of interesting things around the high point. So as much as we're able to tell those stories, that's what we're going to try to do. So hopefully what people will see in upcoming issues is more and more of that as we get more time and as we start to receive more information from people.
So I also noticed in some of the emails that I get and just talking to some high pointers that a lot of them do this for a bigger cause. Sometimes they're raising awareness for certain things, or raising money for other things, or they're doing a high point in memory of someone or something like that. And so it's cool to bring out these stories that have greater meaning than just checking off a peak, which I love doing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it's fun to hear all these different motives that people have.
Yeah, the inspirations are all a little bit all over the place, but that's what's pretty cool about it, right? So, we're all in the same boat, but we're not the same, and we're trying to highlight everybody, as editors. We don't want to exclude anybody. We want to be open to just all the stories and absorb it, and, we get the benefit of hearing from a lot of different people. and then that's been really a pretty good part of it, right? So we have our way of doing it, and we'll share that too. But there's more than one way to do it, right? So it's been interesting. It's been.
I think, Tommy, did you? And I thought this was an awesome comment, and I'm going to attribute it to you, whether you said it or not, because you say a lot of great comments.
I will take credit. Yeah.
But I think it might have been at the end of our last podcast where, every high point is very, very different in terms of, you've got Denali and you've got Britton Hill. And, it's like, and I think that when you look at the people who are doing it, it kind of mirrors that, right? You've got this very interesting, diverse, different group of people who, as you say, do it for different reasons, right? Are at different levels. Some are brand new, they're just starting. Some have a bunch of them under their belt. Some are nearing 50. And so, it really is a very cool group of people who have one thing in common, which is, they're excited about the adventure and the outdoors and seeing the United States and doing all of those things. But, the way they go about doing it is really fun and interesting.
Yeah.
That's true. And I also noticed that some people don't even want to do all 50. They're like, I'll just go where it takes me, and it's pretty fun along the way. We'll just see where I get.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's cool
Which is a
too.
good attitude.
Yeah.
Why not? Get out there and have fun.
Yeah.
Well, what's happening, Lauren, if you think about it, and, hopefully Tommy and I will begin to catch up as we get more time and experience under our belt. But with the podcast, pretty soon you're going to have a better bead on the whole high pointing community mindset than anybody. Because you're continuously talking to people, right? And you're asking them questions and you're digging into the psyche of the high pointer.
Yeah, I mean, you really get all types. I mean, we just had a guy who finished the Appalachian Trail, and then in a couple weeks we'll have a couple who has been driving around the country in their van and high pointing along the way. So you get people at all stages of life, different lifestyles, and it's fun to hear. Like, we might just meet each other on a peak one day.
Yeah.
There's no other activity. Well, I can't think of another activity in life where we would run into each other. And that's kind of cool.
Well, I tell you, that's already happened with us.
Really?
We ran into the whole Facebook social media piece of it is another thing that we want to continue to make sure that we fold into this and expand.
Yeah.
But from that vantage point, we've met people at the convention, we'll get back to a little plug on the convention, that afterwards we've been communicating with on social media. They're going to be coming to the next convention, and so those connections, it's not that big a community. Hopefully it'll get bigger. But right now it's sort of close-knit, and you will continue to see people and run into them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so cool. So can you take the listeners through the process of putting together a magazine? Have you done this before? Was this your first one? How do you get stories? Do people submit them? How do they submit them if people are interested in doing that?
Yeah.
Sure.
So, no, I certainly have not had any formal magazine experience. Just throughout my career in business, have been involved in communications type things and, putting out information and that kind of stuff, but nothing as structured and as formal as this. So a lot of it has been a learning curve for us. Eric, who we actually highlighted on the back cover, was the former, there's Eric right there.
Yeah.
Eric Stein. And Eric was awesome. Eric was so helpful to us in the beginning as we were just trying to figure out what information is available to us. There is a shared directory of information which kind of houses all of the things that people send in to us.
Right.
And so the first step, and Tommy and I, right in the beginning, we're like, all right, we've got to do a deep dive quickly and figure out what's there and what's been published and what hasn't been published.
Yeah.
How did you dove in pretty quickly on the on the shared content, right?
Sure. So most of it seems like people will submit to us, and that's what the magazine has been. It's really promoting the High Point members and the club members who've accomplished something. So a lot of what's been in the past is, they send us an article and, we know they finished 48, 49 or 50 or, whatever it might be. And they send an article in and then it gets published, right, with the photos and those types of things. So
cool.
A lot of the content has been driven by the High Pointers themselves and just organized into a newsletter and a magazine on a quarterly basis, right? So that organization is something I think Tom and I, that'll come easy to us because just we've done something similar, but not really a magazine and whatnot. What we want to add to it is some personal content, writing a little bit, stories, and maybe do more interviews, where we reach out and create the content. Because a lot of it now is member driven, and it's a good it's a quarterly milestone list of the accomplishments and recognizing the people, and we want to continue all of that. So you see things in there from beginner stories and some photos, but then you have there's been obituaries in the past and those types of things. So it's really start to finish on a club member and what's important in the club, right? So we want to
the way I would almost look at it is it's like a family that's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And you're trying to just communicate what everybody's doing and kind of who is where and who's climbing this and what new fun exciting things happen. And so exactly as Tommy said, virtually all of the content has come from one of two sources. It's either been kind of High Pointer directly sent into the newsletter email, right? So people would let us know. Or there are members of the board who are focused on different areas. So, for example, there's somebody who focuses on the county high points. And so they're, kind of the central source of that information. Dave Colville is responsible for the High Pointer Foundation. And so he will send an update for every quarterly edition of the magazine. Right. Alan Ritter, the president of the club, will send a president's letter for each update of the magazine. Yeah. So there are really a number of key people who are involved in it who are kind of focusing on different areas, but the vast majority of it is coming from the High Pointers themselves.
That's perfect.
Yep, we'll gather it and we'll be doing the layouts and the contents per page, and we'll be dealing with the printer directly, who helps us, firm up the layout as well. And that's a piece that's been pretty interesting, to get into that. How many pages and how to print it. And that's the fun part because it's all learning. But really the people part of it, it's been great too. Just we're able to talk to all these different people and organize and collect all the information. So we're like a gathering point for everybody right now, and it's been pretty good.
Yeah,
that's good. And for the listeners and viewers who are wondering, how do I write in? I have a story that I want in the magazine. You can find the email in the show notes on the podcast and on YouTube. So if you have a story with a picture that you want in the next issue or the one after that, or if you have a significant milestone or an interesting story, and sometimes people, they do have really interesting stories, and I'll reach out to them and I'm like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? This is like a really cool thing. And they say, I'm really shy. I don't want to. And that's fine. So go ahead and write into the magazine.
So let me I'll throw a couple of caveats in there, right? So it's newsletter at highpointers.org, right? And you put that in the show notes. Just a couple of observations we've had. We can't publish everything, right? Because we get a lot of information. So we need to, so don't just expect it's going to come in and we're going to be able to print it, although we want to print as much as we possibly can. People have a tendency to be really excited about what they did and have a lot of pages worth of information that they want to provide us. So
this is a quarterly magazine. It's not a scholarly journal.
Yes, exactly. So a good rule of thumb is 600 to 700 words, right? Okay. If it's a 600 to 7 word piece, that fits nicely with a couple of pictures, and we can manage that. And we need to do some editing sometimes. We need to cut some things down a little bit. But we really want the stories told for the most part, in the voice of the people who are doing the high pointing. So, our intent is not to recraft things in a way that, changes the essence of any of it. We really want people to tell their story. So the more that they're able to. Now, here's the other thing, too. Just like you're saying, some people are shy. Some people are just like, hey, I did something great. I don't want to have to be a writer. So don't feel as though it needs to be this, literary masterpiece. Just jot down kind of what you did and where you went and what was fun about it, and send it to us, and we'll try to help tell the story the best way that we can.
That's good information. So what are some of the things that you learned after putting out the first issue?
First thing that I learned is the very specific detail of editing is critical, because we thought that the first issue was really perfect, and then of course after the fact we found a couple of little typos here and a few really minor things, but when you do something like that yourself, the minor little thing is major to you, right? So
I find that in my own podcast all the time.
Yeah, right. It's like you think everything's nailed down perfectly, and then you see something like, oh, damn.
I know. I often, sometimes on my morning walks, I'll listen to the podcast, like the Monday that it comes out, just for, quality control. And I'm like, oh, I told myself I'd edit that out. Like, oh, I can't believe I forgot to do that. Or I should have fixed this. We're our own, critics.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll continual improvement. So we'll look to continue to, get better and better. I guess the one thing I thought is how great the people are. Like, we got tons and tons and tons of really nice feedback and comments, and people, were really very appreciative, which we appreciated, right? It's all volunteer stuff. We all do it because we love it. So it was really nice to hear from people. But by the same token, we also want to hear from people, which we did from a couple folks, about things that they would like to see differently, or things they would like to see improved, or certain types of content. So we're very, we're wide open to everybody's input, and want to try to put out the best thing we can. What do you think, Tommy?
I think I learned that it's never going to be done. You know what I mean? We're going to pick a date, and we're going to hit it, and we're going to publish, right? So there's a lot of things we were talking about, and can we fit it in? Can we not? And so there's always going to be more to do, or things left for the next edition. So where to cut that off? I think we're going to put some dates together. We're going to hit them. We want to be on a schedule. There's a lot of content in there, and I think I also learned that it's not that that it's a bigger deal than I thought, but I think we're connected to the past pretty. There's only been a few editors. I think we recognize that as we talk to the people who are involved, and we got the stories from the board and some of the older members of the group of how it started and why, and it was just, we understood what we were getting into, but to hear it that we're really a connective thread to back to the 80s, really, really closely. It's an important thing. So we're going to embrace that. We want to honor those who came before. We had an original article in there from Jack. I think we put in there in a 1991 article or something like that. So we might republish some older articles to put that voice out there, because we were thinking, I think, all right, what do we do? We're doing this now. How should we start? And we kind of started by going back to read some previous editions and really trying to embrace the past, right? So how do we move forward a little bit and connect to the past? I think that's going to be the job we're going to try to really do well at. Right?
But it's kind of, Tommy, it was really well said, I think, because there's kind of a responsibility that we feel we have to make sure that we're doing two things. One is, talking to kind of the new potential high pointers that are out there, and making sure that we're moving things forward. But at the same time, my guess is that a lot of people, if they're not currently members of the High Pointer Club, really don't know. In fact, a lot of the history we don't know. We're learning the history as we go along. And as we talk to the people who started it and founded it and, really kind of got it to where it is now, it's really fascinating. I mean, it's a fascinating group of people, and we want to make sure that we connect those dots so that people know how we got to where we are now.
What can you tell the listeners about the history of the club and what you've learned from the people that have been a part of it for a long time?
My view is that the club started as something that was just a passionate undertaking. It was really Jack Longacre was the founder of the club, and it was a really interesting story. I mean, he basically, very similar to things that you've said too, where, I didn't know there were other people out there that had this same kind of crazy mindset of, I'm going to try to get to the high point in each state. Yeah. And that's kind of how it started, is he wrote a letter, I think it was Outside Magazine, and what he wanted to do was, just basically say, hey, if there's anybody out there who is also interested in this, I'd like to meet you. Yeah. And what started was this sort of outpouring of, wow, there's a lot of people out there who are interested in this. And then from there, it started growing, and he was very focused on keeping this group together. So he started the conventions, and things just started to grow. And he found there were a lot of like people who were excited about it and got involved with him.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, I think, he wanted to highlight everybody, right?
Yeah.
He didn't want that credit. It seemed like he wanted to promote everybody else, and he was the source that could do that. He was the gathering point. He was the leader, so he was the one who brought everybody together. But I think we actually found an old article about the Rhode Island High Point, where it was owned. It was on the property of, it wasn't owned by the state at the time, and then it was just an article about the gentleman who would not allow people there. They kind of brokered a deal to have them go maybe 4 times a year, and he was quoted in the papers. They said, what's the point of this? He said, if you have to ask, you will never understand the answer. I was kind of looking at that like, all right, that's a pretty good way to put it, because I'm not sure how to answer that sometimes either.
Right.
Right. But no, he was passionate about it, and the more we look into those types of things, the easements and the access, and we're, once he started promoting, let's get to the highest point in each state, he also started to care about what the people who are going to those high points are doing to that area, right? Whether there's some upkeep involved and those types of things. So it wasn't. They wanted to be part of the community in each area, right? They didn't want to disturb the peace, or really, be on anybody's land that they didn't have to. So that was a whole other piece that I've been interested in. Just how did they kind of broker the deal to get us on all these high points in a really in a manner that everybody kind of walked away happy, right? So that's something I'd like to explore a little bit more. But I think when you do think about it, when there's no internet back in the 80s and you've got these people together, it just the difficulty level seems a lot higher than what we're trying to do, right? Yeah. We're gathering information through email, and we can text and communicate and call. So the passion that they had to start it's pretty impressive that they didn't just, quit when the numbers weren't maybe what they thought they were growing into, and they just understood it was going to be a longer term plan and operation. So we're a continuation of that. So.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the challenge that we've got a little bit, is to make sure that as we continue to learn the history, that we're highlighting that and showcasing that, so that as new members of the club join, it becomes maybe a little bit more easily digestible. And, there's like tons and tons of archives and information. And if you have the time and the effort, it's fascinating, right, to dig through it. But hopefully we can put it in some bite-sized chunks to tell the story in a way where people, get a sense of it a little bit more quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anything that's going to be interesting to us, we feel confident that will be, interesting to the masses. The more we communicate with the masses, the more we'll know that that's right, really true. So I think that throwback probably might have came from, I think my wife Melanie likes that on Facebook. That I don't know what I'm not on Facebook, but when it pops up 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Whatever that is,
Yeah.
She's like, that's her favorite part now. But when it first started, they didn't have that.
That's
so
right.
I think maybe I was thinking, all right, if we go back, if she really likes the things that popped up from 5 or 10 years ago, maybe we can share some of that from old magazine editions, just like that. And maybe everyone will like it. So
when you just said that, Tommy, it reminded me of one of the things that we just put into the first issue is a photo contest. So we
Yeah.
got all these photos and we're like, these are amazing. These are great. We can't put all of them in. Let's have a contest. So we talked about like, all right, what should the categories be? Like, if you're fishing, biggest fish, most fish, like what should the things be? And we decided it was going to be first time Highpointer, right? So somebody, first time that they were on the summit of whatever high point it was, that best picture. We decided most artistic. So a lot of the pictures that we get, people are very creative and they like the picture of you on the cover, right? It's like really an awesome, just artistic photo. We said excitement at the top of whatever high point you reach as a category. And then the fourth one was a 50 completer at the summit.
Yeah.
And so, you just put something like that out there and you don't know what to expect, what's going to come back. And I got one picture back and I'm like, this is awesome because I never would have thought of it. And it was for the first time Highpointer, but it was from like 40 years ago. So somebody had, when they first started high pointing, the picture that they took at the top of the place. And I'm like, this is great. This is like vintage first time high pointer shot. Yeah. I expected, somebody at wherever they were like, last week. Right. But, but yeah, when you go back, the history of it, people have been involved in this for a long time. So, there's some cool stuff out there. May 1st is the deadline. So if people see the podcast and you've got a good photo and you want to enter it, you got a short window, right? Because you're probably going to have a week or so. But send in your pictures, right? Those are the 4 categories. And, it would be fun to be in a position, Tommy, where we have too many to judge in order to pick the best ones. We're not there right now. We don't have, there's not that many of them that it's going to be that hard.
I'll send one in.
You send one in.
So what's next for you guys for high pointing? So I know you've been busy with this magazine. Now that it's out, you're probably planning on hitting some peaks.
The timing is so perfect for this, Laura, because we are right in the midst of finalizing our game plan for our next wave. So, Tommy, why don't you sort of outline where we're going, and we'll give you a little insight into the insanity that is kind of the approach and the process that we use here.
Okay.
So it feels like it's been a while, but we were hibernating a little in the winter, and we were doing the magazine too. So we looked back at when we had our summit, our global summit in New Hampshire.
That's right.
In October, we did clusters, right? We were looking to attack as many as we could in one trip. So this next trip we're doing. I think Thursday, May 4th, we're starting out. We're going to fly into Memphis. We're going to hit Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. And we're going to drive over to Biloxi and then fly out of New Orleans. So we're going to have that little trip.
Just so we can go to
We're going to get 3 high points. We're going to Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida in those 3, right? So we're trying to plan what we're doing. That's the next trip, May 4th. And then in the first week in June, we're going to do Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana, those 3. The Kentucky High Point is we're going to go to the Railbird Fest down there. It's a concert at the Red Barn. Yes.
Excellent.
2-day event, pretty good show down there. And then we're going to go over to the Kentucky High Point, which I think we're also going to do a little repair to the stonework on where the plaque is at the top of that.
Okay.
In conjunction with Dave Colville, and then Ohio and Indiana. So we're going to get that group there. My son goes to University of Kentucky. We're going back to that show with some of his friends down there. So that'll be good to get down there. And then we're going to do June or July. We're going to hit Maine or Vermont up here closer to where I live. He'll come up and we get one of those. Just it's more of a real hike. Those 6 that we just mentioned are kind of somewhat easier that we can kind of go see the states and accomplish that in a short amount of time. So we'll have 7 more by the time we see everybody at the convention.
We're excited about this trip because, from a high pointing perspective, this is more getting to the high points, but also seeing areas of the country that we've never been to. Right. So I've never been to Mississippi. Tommy's never been to Mississippi. We've never been to Alabama. So it'll be, we're really we're going to do the high points, of course, because, that's the purpose. But look, I think that is one of the biggest rationales to be a high pointer is it gives you that reason to go to places that you normally would never go.
Yeah.
I don't think Tommy and I would be going to Mississippi, Alabama, and Britton Hill in Florida if we were not high pointing.
That's right. At least
Yeah.
in that order.
Yeah, everyone
right?
says
You know,
that. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah, we're gonna hit Graceland. You know, we're gonna hit Sun Records. We'll go to
Awesome.
Marshall Shoals over there. It's a little music,
Yeah.
music, a lot of music to start that trip. But then Redneck Riviera, right down Panama City. We'll go to the beach down there, and we'll hit Biloxi. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe a AAA baseball game or two.
Yeah.
I wanted to spend more time on the beach in Panama City area, but then I remembered last time on the podcast I said I don't want to go to the beach. I want to go to the mountains. So I got to be true to myself. I think. You know, he's like, wait a minute, you're the guy who didn't want to go to the beach. I'm like, no,
Right.
no.
And we may end up, you'll see on our next podcast, if we're tan, we may have deviated from that plan.
Right.
Well, you'll be on Katahdin and Mount Mansfield shortly after. So,
Right.
Yes, that's true.
oh, that's a
That'll get
lot
us
of
to
fun.
20, that'll get us to 20, I think, right? That'll
Yes.
get us to 20.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
And then,
we're
of course,
trying
the convention is in Georgia, but you guys have already done Brasstown Bald, right?
Right.
We have, yes. But the convention is going to be a blast. I would really highly recommend, if people have not gone to a convention or you're on the fence, go to the convention, because you're going to find that, in fact, Tommy, you said this last time too when we were at the convention. It's a group of people who get it. Like, you know, when you're saying things like we just said about playing, like, they're like, absolutely. And they've got their own stories. And, you know, it really is a fun group of people. And Tony Cobb and Amy Cashin are the sponsors and the host and hostess of this upcoming convention. And they've been doing a really, really great job. So there's going to be, you know, recommended things that you can do around there. Tony's, in fact, I'll throw this as a shout out too. Tony's putting something together. He's calling it Confessions of a High Pointer. And it's kind of like, you know, around the fireplace, around the fire pit, talking about fun, interesting, funny, high pointing stories. So if anybody has a story, I'll give you this as well to put in the show notes as well.
Okay.
And you can send it directly to Tony at his email. And, you know, he's sort of compiling and organizing that. So that'll be a fun night.
What a fun project. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
In talking to Tony, you know, he's been to a few conventions, right? And he's been around for a while. And one of the things I think he really enjoys is just kind of the loose, casual conversations by the fire, right? Not a planned event. Just everybody can kind of be around the same space and just talk, you know. And I think that's what he remembers from some of the better ones he's attended or the ones he liked the most. And he's trying to bring that a little bit to Georgia this year. And it's the fact that we know that area, we drove through it, and it is it's beautiful.
It's a beautiful
It's a gorgeous area.
It
There's
is.
a lot to do there. You know, it's not desolate. There's a lot of waterfalls and different trails around. Not just a high point, right? I think it's going to be. He picked a great spot, and so it's going to be a home run.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun. We're going to see you there, right?
Yeah. Yes, you will. I can't wait. For the listeners who don't know, we have the High Pointers Club. Then we have Apex to Zenith magazine, and they collide. And this is like a Venn diagram. So the High Pointers, or Apex to Zenith magazine, is the official High Pointers Club magazine. So that's where those two meet. And then I came in kind of out of nowhere, and I said, hey, I'll do this podcast. Now, I am a member of the High Pointers Club. This podcast is not the official High Pointers Club podcast. I will be regularly collaborating with Tom and Tommy to feature podcast guests in the quarterly magazine from here on out. So in the next issue, you will see that I submitted an article highlighting one of the guests from an earlier episode who's also a High Pointers Club member. And Tom and Tommy will come back onto the podcast again to talk about the latest issue. And we're constantly collaborating, sharing content, and talking about who's who in high pointing and what's new.
Yeah. And keep that as a mystery, right? It'll be the mystery guest. Will be highlighted.
They don't know who they are.
Which will be great. But then also, you know, Robin, for example, I saw that you communicated with her, which is awesome, right? So we're going to also try to, as much as we can just use two different platforms to communicate out, because to Tommy's Venn diagram, big Venn diagram guy, right?
Yeah.
You've got the social media, Facebook stuff. You've got Apex to Zenith as a magazine communicating information. You've got your podcast, right? You've got the convention as a place where all people can converge and come together. So the more different sources and vehicles that we have to communicate, the better.
Right.
You're right. And for the listeners who don't know, Robin is affiliated with the Highpointers Club Foundation. She will be on the podcast shortly. I think in a couple of weeks here, we'll get her on and she can talk about what the foundation does and what you can do for the foundation. So, Tom and Tommy, thanks for coming on to the show. And thank you for all that you do for the Highpointers Club and for the magazine. It's a ton of work. You volunteered for this, and it was such a great product. I look forward to more, and I know that the listeners do as well.
Wow.
Thank you. Appreciate it.